What's the biggest bullet you've ever dodged? I was subletting an apartment in college and got zapped by the electric stove. Gave notice immediately and moved out with very clear reasons why I was moving out. The building burnt a few weeks later. LOL, I can't stop imagining you getting a static shock and then just packing your crap. Eater. I know that's not what happened, but still, haha. I was a teen driver not paying attention at an intersection at the crest of a hill with low visibility when the light turned green. The car behind me honked, and just as I was about to go, a truck barreled through the red light on the perpendicular road at decidedly ludicrous speed. If I had been paying attention and gone when the light turned green, I very likely would have been T-boned to death. Closest call I've ever had. I was out kayaking on a lake and several bullets whizzed by me. There was a distinct buzz sound as it went by. I think some people were just out plinking in their backyard, adjacent to the lake, and didn't think a backstop was necessary. This also happened to me a few weeks later when I was paddling on a small stream. Bullets whizzed by above the bank, just over my head. I don't think anyone knew I was there either time. Regardless, when you go out and shoot stuff, make sure there's a backstop. FFS. Also, I don't know how big the bullets were, so I'm unsure which was the biggest bullet dodged. As a dead guy, I would be so pissed off to learn my life ended because I was floating in a goddamn boat at the wrong second. I matched with a guy on Tinder who played for the Atlanta Falcons. He was really charming and seemed nice. He asked me to fly down to Atlantic City for Memorial Day weekend. Said he would pay for everything: airfare, hotel, food, etc. But I had never met him before and he refused to give me his phone number. I was uncomfortable flying to meet a stranger, so I told him no. 2 weeks later he was on the news for kicking and killing his girlfriend's dog. This one just materialized yesterday. Actually, about a year ago at my job I was offered to switch from my current team where I was established for a few years, had seniority, etc. for a new department that just started to kick it off. Right processes. Basically start from square one. A lot more work for the same amount of pay. I figured frick it and went. Yesterday they announced that they just closed the physical HQ office for my old department, and everyone in that entire part of the company would have to either move to one of 14 random states that we can pick. It's chosen basically by a roulette wheel for where you're going, to a local office, or they're going to be fired on the 22nd of June. Thankfully, since I'm part of the new department, I wasn't included in that mandate. Phew. 2005, my friend and I evacuated New Orleans 2 days before Hurricane Katrina and drove to Mississippi with the little money we had. We were trying to decide on where to stay for the night, and it was between a mid-range hotel or a really cheap motel. We decided to spend a little more for the hotel. During the night the eye of the storm came through Mississippi and flattened the roof of the motel we decided against. My mom wasn't going to leave for Katrina. I told her I was going to take me and my little sister and hitchhike if she didn't pack the car and leave within the hour. My dad didn't leave and he ended up on the roof with our neighbor because our house got flooded. No way all of us would have survived. Katrina decimated my town. Everything 2 miles inland or less was destroyed. I was booked on Pan Am Flight 103 which went down over Lockerbie, Scotland. I didn't have a premonition or anything supernatural. I just decided to cancel my seat. Didn't think anything of it until the plane went down and my mother had written down my flight plan and reminded me. This was back in the day when you could cancel without a penalty up to a couple of days in advance. Pro tip: to avoid the few days away cancellation fees, call or go online and reschedule the flight for a week or 2 out, then wait a day and cancel. Physically, a bus. I grew up in Bermuda, and since it is such a small island, cars are limited to 1 per family, and everyone drives mopeds. I was driving into town, and came up to a red light behind a bus. As is tradition, I scooted around the bus to be in the front of the line of traffic. Literally 2 seconds later a second bus smashed into the back of the first bus at like 30 miles per hour. I would have been pancaked. Without question, 100% dead. I just sat on the side of the road for a bit and thought about my mortality. It's crazy how 1 second life is in front of you, then nothing. I was in an accident in my motorcycle a few years ago. Last thing I remember before paramedics arrived was saying "oh f you." It changes your perspective on life. Not me. A Dutch mate of mine living in Tasmania had to visit his sick mum in Amsterdam. Booking his flight online, he said to his wife, "You know, I'm sick of flying Malaysian Airlines. The food is crap. The hosties are miserable. It'll cost more, but I'm booking with Singapore." So, instead of dying on MH17, he was on a plane 40 kilometers ahead of it. Butterfly effect. If someone at Malaysia had made a better menu, he could have died. I really needed a job and the manager at a dispensary in my area offered me a spot. I said no, and 4 days later they were raided and everyone got arrested. Attempted suicide. Ended up passing out in some bushes near the train station. Early the next morning, a girl I went to high school with, who I barely knew, saw me while she was boarding the train for a college interview early in the morning. She recognized me and told the conductor. He dismissed me as a junkie who just needed to sleep it off. She said, "I know him. He does not do drugs or drink. Call 911 now. 3 days in a coma. etc. etc. I am very grateful." Had a friend who asked if I wanted to move to CA with him and his family. I was 16 and thought it sounded fun. I didn't know at the time, but he was actually rescuing me from my insane mother and a not so happy home life. When you are abused, sometimes it is hard to know you are abused until you become an adult and gain a perspective. I shudder to think what would have happened to me if I had stayed there. I had 2 job offers in different states at the same time. The one I didn't take was offering more money, but I just didn't gel with the guy who would be my boss and really liked the guy who would be my boss at the lower offer. The better offer was in a state I had always wanted to live in, for a company I admired, but something felt off, so I went with the lower offer. I ended up meeting my wife in the city of the lower offer. Meanwhile, the company that had given me the higher offer abruptly closed and laid off their entire staff with no severance. So if I had taken that, I would have been stuck on the other side of the country with no job and no money. About 6 months after I left my ex, he got caught sexting a 12-year-old. He was 34 at the time. My first serious boyfriend, as an adult, is now serving time in federal prison after being busted for distributing child pornography. Absolutely horrifying. My first ever boyfriend dated me when I was 14 and he was 16. We only dated for 1 week before he took me into the woods and forced me to kiss him. I started to feel icky and broke it off that same day. 5 years later I found out that he was now in prison for raping 2 14-year-old girls. I broke my lease and moved out of a terrible apartment complex I was living in to move back home because I was broke. 2 weeks later the whole complex burned to the ground from a lab in another unit. A few edits for some commonly asked questions. The apartment was right outside of downtown Birmingham. Ow. I didn't have renter's insurance. Broke 20yo at the time, so wouldn't have got any kickback from that. I did end up getting my security deposit back, which they said I had forfeit by breaking the lease, so that was nice. That lab wasn't mine. I packed mine up and brought it back to Florida with me where it belonged. Hi, I have a similar one. I broke a lease to move home due to being broke. During the course of that lease there were multiple murders and break-ins all throughout the complex. My apartment was on the first floor, so easy break-in. That time I didn't go along for the ride when a friend of mine was running weed years ago, back when it was more illegal. I was bored and unemployed at the time, and passed on this trip because I had to go to a job interview to be a zombie for Halloween festivities at an amusement park. I got the job. My friend got arrested and did 30 days in jail. That sounds like an awesome job. A year ago, almost to the day, I was offered a new job. It was exactly what I was looking for and was really excited. They told me they would email the contract, but after a week I hadn't had anything. After a lot of chasing they told me they'd changed the structure of the organization so the position wasn't available. I have a month's notice for my current job, and if I had taken the job my notice period would have been after the cut-off date for furlough in the UK. The new job was in an industry that collapsed through the pandemic and the industry I work in has boomed. If I had received that email I would have probably been close to bankruptcy now. finishing up my paper route when I was a kid, walking home on the sidewalk next to a busy road with sister on the inside, me dragging our little buggy on the outside. Middle of winter, car jumps the curb and takes out our buggy. Neither of us know what the heck had just happened other than the ungodly scraping sound and that our buggy was gone. Find out later that the driver saw us run home scared and brought back our buggy, which was utterly destroyed in a crumpled heap. I was pulling the cart and my hand was on it, so I'm not sure how I avoided eating chrome that day. Not a single scratch on me. I still think about it regularly and it's been over 30 years. I got on an intercity bus and almost sat in the middle but moved and sat at the back. The bus later collided with a truck and got opened up like a tin can. If I had sat where I originally intended, I would have been killed. I was late to my bus and instead of running to catch it, I decided to miss it and it was later hit by a speeding truck. Caught the one behind it and later saw the aftermath. 2 people died. Not me, but my friend. We were in a bar and she was talking to a dude she met on Tinder. When she turned around, I saw him put something into her beer. I walked up, pretended to stumble, and knocked it out of her hand. Apologized. Told her I'd buy her next beer, and when we walked over to the bar I told her what he did. We left right after. Decided to grab a case of beer and play Mario Kart that night instead. I only tagged along because she asked me to, which I'm always perfectly happy to do. Glad I did. Pro tip to people: if you aren't in a crappy establishment, tell the bartender. The rapist may get some repercussions, at least kicked out. If you're in a crappy establishment, just gtfo. If the rapist is a regular, the staff may have their back. Could get sketchy for you. Was driving on a freeway in the right lane when there was a sudden traffic jam ahead. I slammed on my brakes and was about to swerve onto the shoulder when I noticed that I wasn't sure the semi behind me could stop and I didn't know how long we actually had a shoulder. Construction was happening at the time. Made the decision to rear-end the car in front of me to stay off the shoulder. The truck went onto the shoulder, brakes squealing, and finally managed to stop when the back tires of their trailer were level with me. Good thing we weren't in a center lane and that we happened to have a shoulder at that moment. As a bonus, I stopped in time and didn't hit the car in front of me after all, though I would have happily taken that hit, and hopefully only would have shook up the people in front of me, in place of literally being hit by a truck. You have some good split-second decision-making skills. Once at a bar, a woman was surprisingly into me as we danced. If I had had more confidence back then, I definitely could have taken her home. In the end, one of my karaoke buddies ended up with her instead and got caught by her husband that night. I knew a guy that got stabbed by the husband after he went home with a woman. Apparently she liked seeing the husband go crazy on the dude she brought home. A few months ago I was driving on I-80 at night when out of nowhere the biggest buck I'd ever seen is in the middle of my lane. I did exactly what you're not supposed to do and swerved, and thankfully managed to keep the rear of the car content with it. I literally shaved that buck's butt. My mirror was folded in. I know you're not supposed to swerve, but I drive a tiny little thing and that buck's body would have gone through my windshield into my and my wife's face at 70 miles per hour. I was supposed to hang out with a couple of friends one night. We were going to go to a party that we were all invited to the weekend before. I asked to get off work early so I could go to the party. My manager let me go early, so I went to go find my friends. But I had a really bad feeling all day and it just kept getting worse. Instead of turning left to go to my friend's house, I went right and went home. I found out a few weeks later that they got busted with C in their car. They were 16 and 17 at the time. I was 18, so I would have been screwed. In 1996, my parents were deciding between 2 houses to move into. They picked the new construction that resulted in being placed on shoddy soil and years of lawsuits when we ultimately moved in 2001. Anyway, the other house they could have picked, presumably on better soil, would have placed my older sister at Columbine High School as a freshman for the 1998 to 1999 school year. Reading this at first like this doesn't seem like a dodge blow. Not me but my dad. He traveled to London for work back from 2001 to 2007. He was booked for the day off on the 7th of July 2005, as that is my birthday, and the train he normally got to work was one of the ones that was bombed by terrorists. I think that was the one where people would normally have taken the Piccadilly line changed because of a delay, so a lot of people died due to a fault on the Piccadilly line. I was 18 and nearly went to work as a live-in housekeeper for a single man overseas. I naively thought it was going to be a straightforward cleaning arrangement, and somehow my parents never thought to raise any concerns. Luckily I changed my mind and took a nanny job with a family instead. Depending on the counties involved here, yeah, you might have lost your freedom that day if you're gone. Jesus. Not me but my dad. COVID saved his life. He was having trouble breathing and general signs of heart trouble. Middle of the night, woken up to a panic. My mom's first instinct was to drive him to the hospital, about 20 minutes away. On their way out of the driveway, my mom realized that the air was going to be full of people with COVID and didn't know where to take him. She went back into the driveway and called for an ambulance. About 5 minutes later, thank God they were close, the paramedics showed up. Right as my dad collapsed, they were able to revive him and sustain him until they could get him to where he needed to go. If my mom had stuck to her plan of driving him 20 minutes to the hospital, he would have died in the car on the freeway. I know COVID has screwed a lot of things up for a lot of people, but for me, it's been a blessing in disguise. So glad your dad is okay. COVID saved my mom, too. She's a big time. If you ignore it, it will go away when it comes to her health. But when she spent 2 weeks with COVID sounding symptoms, she was at least scared enough of COVID to get herself a hospital. Turned out she had been ignoring a heart attack for 2 weeks. I almost fell for a pyramid scheme in high school. My friend brought me to one of their meetings, ACN, and I was so on board, but my parents talked me down. I was upset at them until I learned more about MLMs and quickly changed my mind. Sometimes I imagine where I'd be now if I went through with it. It wouldn't be pretty, that's for sure. Wow, I remember ACN. What a sham. Friends and I went to the top of Bunker Hill in Boston. It's 294 steps and they are straight up. At the top I took a picture of them and backed up a little to get them in the view. After the picture I turned around and realized there was no rail and I had almost stepped directly into the hatch leading down the stairs. I think stairs that go straight up are called ladders. 9mm. Christmas, 2008. Me and Lil Bro were opening gifts on the living room and a bullet came through our crappy roof, landing a few centimeters away from where we were. People who fire guns into the air are worthless. I found an explosive device in a National Guard training area when I was 14. It had little pull string and a metal plate to attach it to a tree. I held the thing in my hand and almost pulled the string but decided to attach it to a tree instead and put on a longer pull string. I pulled the string and it blew a 5-inch hole in the tree. The explosion was so loud the police came and it made the local news. They didn't catch me. I would have lost at least one hand, maybe both or worse. They didn't catch me. I'm sure you would have gotten warned to call for help if you ever found something like that again, but you wouldn't have gotten into trouble for finding some old military ordnance. When I was in high school, I think I was 15, my boyfriend and some of my friends were going to a party. My mom refused to let me go and made me stay in the room with her so I wouldn't sneak out. We got a call that night from one of my friends. My boyfriend got super drunk and called his sister to come pick him up. She was completely sober, but was hit by a drunk driver on the way home. She was killed instantly and my boyfriend was paralyzed from the waist down. I know I would have been in the car with them had I gone to the party. That was 25 years ago, but I still tell that story to any of my friends who say I promise I can drive just fine after drinking. What's crazy is your boyfriend was smart enough to call for a ride and not drive drunk yet still ended in a drunken car accident. I once met a girl at a bar a few years ago. She was hot and she started a conversation with me. I don't remember about what, but at the end of it I wanted to ask her out, but being extremely shy I couldn't. If she hadn't started to talk to me I would have just admired and avoided her, being a big and awkward guy. Anyway, I went to the bathroom to clear my head and when I came back I saw my friend who I came with asked her out. A total dong move because I told him I wanna ask her out. And I just stand there with an awkward smile waiting for them to leave so I could drink my anger away. Couple of days after that a mutual friend said that that friend from the bar was robbed by a girl he had brought to his apartment. So still today I get mixed feelings when I see him. Well, you should still hate him, but at least the stranger got him back for you. Meet a guy years ago. Thought we were friends. Got into contact with him few years ago. He was acting sketchy, so I unfriended him. I look him up, found out he on sex offenders registry. My friend is giving me a ride to the bus station. We get pulled over by the police and I have several ounces of pot in my backpack. My friend has about $20 worth of pot in his underwear, which I had given him as payment for the ride. The cops give some crappy excuse like failing to signal within 50 feet of an intersection, which was obviously a pretext. Cops ask for permission to search the car, and my scared butt friend gives consent, like an idiot. Cops tell us to exit the car. I grab my backpack and we both get out of the car. One cop begins to search the car, while the other two cops prepare to start searching us. My mind is racing. What can I do to get out of this? This could put me in jail for a long time. Out of desperation, I ask the cop about to search me, a sergeant, if I was free to go. Since I was only a passenger, it was the only thing I could think to ask. To my surprise, the sergeant hands me back my ID and says I am free to go. I later realized that at that point, they hadn't yet found anything illegal and they didn't have reasonable suspicion to detain either of us. I am dumbfounded. That gambit wasn't supposed to work, but somehow it worked. I put on my backpack and stroll calmly to the nearest intersection, round the corner, and as soon as I'm out of view, sprint about 3 blocks to a construction site and hide inside a porta-john, where I stay for the next 2.5 hours. My friend calls me about an hour after the stop, while I'm still hiding in the toilet, and says the cops found his weed right after they let me go, and gave him a $500 ticket. He says that the cops suspect I'm the one who provided it to him, and they're out driving around at that very moment looking to pick me back up. I waited until well after dark to emerge from my hiding place and caught a taxi home. I laid low for a few weeks expecting a knock at my door any day, but fortunately I never heard anything about it again. High school GF wanted to talk about baby names. I was headed to college. No thoughts of being a parent. My mom even found a note in my pocket listing her favorites if we had a boy. Anyway, we broke up after 2 years. The next guy she dated was a dad within 9.5 MOS. She was gonna baby trap you. Yikes. When I was about 10 years old, I leaned backwards onto a tall bookcase shelf, which happened to have a sword collection on the highest shelf. Many of these swords had their blades exposed for show. And what would happen at that very moment? That shelf gave way and all of the swords came and landed on me, including my head. Surprisingly, I got not a single cut, no concussion, and only a small bruise on the head. And being young, I dismissed this incident with gracious forgetfulness. Bookcase of Damocles. 2 consecutive seizures from alcohol withdrawal the day I checked into rehab without detoxing. I was told afterwards that it was 50/50 that I survived that night. I'm currently just a couple months shy of 5 years sober. I had my alcoholic withdrawal seizure in a hammock on the beach in front of a bunch of tourists. Not fun stuff. I overslept for work a few years back and arrived about 20 minutes late. When I got there, a car had barreled through the fence at the edge of our parking area and was head first into the rear of my co-worker's car. It was a hit and run while the car was reported as stolen, so there was no driver to get insurance information from, and my co-worker's insurance ended up being billed for his own repairs. My normal parking spot was the spot between the fence and my co-worker's car. If I'd have been on time, it would have been my car that got hit and the car would have collided with the side of my car, causing damage to at least 3 panels of the vehicle and likely breaking all that side's windows. Happiest I was ever to be late. I was working in an amusement park during college summers. I used to come home from college on a Friday afternoon and usually pick up a Friday shift as well as a full weekend. During the month that the park was only open on weekends, I was a manager at my attraction. One particular Friday, I got home and was too exhausted to do a Friday night shift, so I bagged it and decided to just work the Saturday, Sunday and be back at school on Monday. I got a call from a good friend and co-worker telling me that our attraction was in flames. There were casualties, and a couple of my friends and co-workers were missing. 7 people lost their lives. My co-worker, assistant manager, went back in and pulled people out to safety. He was okay. I was in shock for a few days. Had I done what I usually do, I would have been there in charge, and I know I would have gone in to help. It could have been an entirely different situation. So yeah, I dodged a bullet, but a devastating event happened. I'll never know. I took my wife to an indoor shooting range in 2014. I had been at this range many times, and safety was always their top priority. They made you sit through a safety video, take a quiz, and get a temporary certification before they allowed you onto the range. Place got really busy and their safety policy became less stringent as time went on. I noticed that the lane next to us had 3 people in it, already a violation. 2 big guys and 1 tiny woman, probably her in 20s. They were handing her various firearms and laughing when she couldn't handle the recoil. Big violation there, and incredibly irresponsible. This girl was muzzle sweeping everyone, another huge violation. I got a bad feeling. Told my wife to pack it up because we were leaving. As soon as we started walking away, bang. That girl had fired a round right where my wife was standing just a few seconds prior. I told the range officers that they needed to get in there and do something about those idiots, and that we weren't coming back. I have only been to a range a few times since that happened, and now I don't even go at all. Too many idiots. I moved a dresser into the basement at my mom's house before I moved out. I lost my grip and fell down almost an entire flight of stairs against a solid cinder block wall, the dresser right behind. Somehow I managed to walk away unharmed. It was unlikely to kill me, but I'm still surprised I walked away without being hurt or breaking something. The human body treads that fine line between surviving deadly catastrophes multiple times and fricking itself up for life if you turn your head wrong. When I was a teen, I was very sick. I was like 90 pounds and couldn't hold down food. I knew something was wrong with me, but doctors were falsely under the impression I had an eating disorder and thought I was lying and that my parents were enabling me. At one hospital visit when I was 17 years old, I was lied to by a doctor and tricked into joining an eating disorder program against my will. They kept telling me they were going to keep me in the hospital for 6 months and had this whole program planned out for me. And they put me on an insanely high dosage of anxiety meds that turned me into a zombie person. They were not telling me parents much info though. My mom actually caught them having secret convos about me they didn't want her to hear. We were starting to get vibes they might forcibly take me away from my parents. So I made up an excuse to leave the hospital and said I would be back in a couple days, but never did go back. I waited a very hard year alone with no treatment until I turned 18. When I was legally an adult and couldn't be kidnapped, lol. And then I felt safe enough to try to give medical treatment another try. Finally found out I had lupus the whole time. It freaks me out to think about what would have happened to me if I had been forced into eating disorder treatment for years for no reason, and gotten zero treatment for the pretty dangerous disease they were so sure I didn't have, lol. Everyone had good intentions and doctors save so many lives. They are often really good people. But I hate that people like me slip through the cracks and almost die sometimes, haha. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.